Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and it is time for another one of our whiskey comparison videos. Today I'm actually going to be tossing a tea in with all of this. Believe it or not, jumping into the world of tea from whiskey, just briefly. But the two whiskeys that I'm going to compare today are here to kind of give us a lesson in how to not stereotype a whiskey because of the region it comes from, but also to understand the differences between regions. So kind of working against myself in the way that I'm presenting this, but you'll get it as we get there. So the first whiskey that I'm going to pull up here is the Lagavulin 8, an 8-year-old Islay whiskey. And that is traditionally known as a peated smoky whiskey. And then we have Benriach 10-year and Curiositas, which is the Latin term for curiosity. How about that? Is that pretty simple? Yeah. So that's what that is. This comes from Speyside. So we have a Speyside peat and we have an Islay peat. What is the difference between the two? When we talk about terroir, when we talk about the influences that peat could have on a whiskey, we talk about, what peat is. Peat is basically just compacted earth. And if you think about it, if you have things like heather and you have grasses, you're going to get that as part of the flavor of that peat or the characteristics of that peat. If you are on maybe a little more rocky terrain and you have a lot more sea air coming in and the saltiness of the sea, you have more of the iodine characteristics from the water that's around Islay, the medicinal qualities of that, then what you're going to end up with is peat that's going to have those types of influences. And if you don't understand how peat works its way into a whiskey, it's not coming from the water. If there's water flowing down from the mountains that is going through peat, it will be dark colored water when it comes into the distillery. However, it's not going to taste like smoke, which is what we think of when we think of peated whiskeys, is that smokiness. The smoke is coming from the clumps of peat that they're throwing into a fire, and that fire is then bringing up smoke into a floor above where they have all of that barley sitting there waiting to bind with that smoke. And that's where that smoky characteristic comes from in almost all peated whiskeys. It can come from other sources. Sometimes people will do a peated finish. In other words, take a barrel that had peated whiskey in it, put another whiskey into it, and that'll impart some of that smoke in there. But it's that smoking of the barley that tends to be where that peat comes from. So in giving you that explanation, you should then consider that a Speyside smoky whiskey is probably going to be imparted with a lot more of the grassy, heathery kind of notes in the smoke versus the more briny, salty, more meaty kind of smoke that you would expect, that little medicinal quality in Lagavulin. Is that what we're going to find? Let's find out. So I'm going to start with Benriach, and I'm telling you the reason I am starting with Benriach is because if you start with Lagavulin 8, that is all you're going to taste for the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to do these separate from each other, nosing and tasting, and work my way over there. So this one has a really, what's interesting is there's not a lot of smoke on the nose on this one. Very light smoke. I get more fruity characteristics, what I would kind of expect from a Speyside whiskey. But this is where I'm saying, watch your stereotypes. Don't say, okay, Speyside whiskey, so it's going to be sherry influenced, or it's going to be fruity. It's going to be, kind of a medium to light. No, that's not the way it is anymore. There's a lot of distilleries in Speyside, and they all want to differentiate each other from each other in some way or another. And so they do different things with whiskey, such as coming out with a peated expression. Glendronach has done the same thing. And, so they're going to experiment and try some different things. But what you will find the difference is in the character of the smoke and how it binds to a particular whiskey and those fruit flavors and those things you normally expect. So this is very, very light on the smoke on the nose, and it will fool you because you'll go, oh, this is not a smoky whiskey at all, really. Just a little hint. There's more apple in this. It's the color of white wine. It actually noses a bit like a white wine. There's a little bit of a vinegary thing in there, and then just hints of this smoke, and there's some vanilla in there. They use virgin oak casks for this, from what I understand, and also some first or second fill bourbon casks. I've also heard that they maybe use rum casks as a finishing cask on this. Doesn't say so on the label, so I'm not sure on that for sure. But so, yeah, as a Islay whiskey drinker who's used to smoke that type of smoke, you're kind of missing it here. There's a warmth, but it's not it's not really too far out front. This has a really nice mouthfeel to it. What's interesting is it has a fruitiness, and then it goes into this really strong pepperiness. Let's say it's a white pepper, maybe. Yeah, I mean it's not like a rye pepper. It's definitely much more of a white pepper kind of heat to it. And then you're like, where's the smoke? The smoke just kind of rides in there. It reveals itself after you start going through that initial sting from that white pepper. And then it fades into this smokiness. And it's a really nice light smokiness. I would say that it is more like it's like a wood burning fire is what it is. It's like smoke from a wood burning fire rather than from a peaty, medicinal, salty kind of a experience. Wow, man, the apple actually pulls out a lot more after that. I wish I'd have brought some water with me. Oh, look at that. Did I? Yes. This whiskey, after a little experimentation, is actually even better when you add some water to it. So I definitely recommend adding some water to this because this one really tends to open up a lot more. Yeah. There's the apple. Oh man, there's an interesting note in there. There's a little caramel in there. The smoke actually is, that sting comes out of it, that white pepper heat. It's still there, but it's not quite as much. Nice warming as it goes down. I would almost suggest that this is a good winter whiskey. For a Speyside, it's probably one of the best winter whiskeys that I could probably mention because, and what's funny is when I first tried this, I did not like it. But it's that same thing of when you taste a Speyside whiskey, if you put in your head that it's going to be fruity, whatever, that can hurt you. Or if you say it's a peated whiskey, it's got to taste like a peated whiskey, and it doesn't. It's somewhere there in the middle. And it's actually a very interesting balance. It's probably too smoky for the person who doesn't like smoky whiskeys, and it might be a little bit too fruity for somebody who likes smoky whiskeys. I don't know. It's really interesting. I get kind of a baked apple thing out of this. It's kind of like a smoky baked apple. really interesting whiskey. One of those that you're going to have to just come at it with no real expectations and just enjoy it for what it is. Probably enjoy it in isolation. This one is a younger Lagavulin. According to the literature, they're talking about the fact that this was a standard age for a Lagavulin back in the 19th century. So interesting that they brought it back. Nice to see that neither of these whiskeys are using any kind of colorant. I do believe they chill filtered this one, though. This one, which is kind of amazing because that's at 48%, which means it probably doesn't necessarily need to be chill filtered. But it doesn't say that it's not. I'm not going to nail them and say that it is, but I'd be surprised if somebody as big as Diageo, who makes this, wouldn't do some chill filtering. So this one definitely pulls. This is smoke. Smoke, smoke, smoke. The thing about a younger Islay whiskey is that the smoke is usually going to be a little more dominant because the oak hasn't had time to really add its influence in there. There's definitely the saltiness. There's a nice little sweetness in there. There's a fruitiness that's just like tapping on the door saying, hey, I'm here. There's a little caramel in there. It's like maybe some hints of a bourbon type effect from the oak on here. Not sure of the casks that they use for this either, and I'm assuming they probably use bourbon casks for this. Very interesting. Yeah, it's so this is where I bring in my tea reference. This is Lapsang Souchong. I knew I was going to butcher that name as soon as this tea, if you like smoky whiskeys, then you're going to like this tea because this is a smoky tea. It's from China. It is, they use pine and use pine smoke and smoke that tea, and it will remind you a lot of an Islay whiskey. And the one specifically that it reminds me of is Lagavulin. Lagavulin has that black tea, especially on the palate. The black tea will come through. So I've had the Lagavulin 9. The Lagavulin 9 is a little more refined than this. Amazing what 1 year in the cask can do. It's a little rougher around the edges. This is probably more like when you think of Ardbeg, Wee Beastie. This has had more age than that. But it's a little bit more of the untamed side of Lagavulin. So very interesting. The smoke is there throughout. There's a little sweet. There's a little bitter. I would say that the finish on the Curiositas actually is a little longer than it is on this one, as in intensity. This one will stay on your palate for a long time, but not quite as aggressively as Benriach does initially. So it's an interesting whiskey. Yeah, the fruitiness, the smoke, but the smoke is much more of that salty and medicinal kind of an experience. It's got a nice mouthfeel to it. The bitter kind of kicks in there for a moment, but then fades off. It's like a charred wood bitter that comes in there. The tannins, I think, sort of pull through a little bit there. Just towards the end of once it hits your palate. As you go into the finish, it all kind of goes away. But man, that smoke just lingers throughout. And I would say it's up to you as to which one you would say, yes, I love that. But I wanted you to get the difference between what a peated Highland or Speyside whiskey would be like versus going to one that is from Islay. They are different animals. They're going to give you a different result. You guys tended to say that you didn't think that there was going to be a Speyside whiskey that could probably compete with an Islay smoky whiskey. I say stay tuned. You never know. I've had some good smoky whiskeys. This is actually a really nice entry into that smoky world with the more earthy, herbally, fruity characteristic that you expect out of a Speyside whiskey. So give them a shot, see what you think, and don't poo-poo smoke just because it's not coming from Islay, because there are plenty of opportunities to enjoy smoky whiskeys from all over Scotland. Cheers, and Slán